All right, we're live. Hey, everybody. All right, Edna, I'll let you do your opening remarks
All right,
whenever you
ready?
feel like getting
Well,
started.
awesome. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Edna Devuti. I'm this year's president of CCDA, and it is truly a pleasure and a privilege to welcome you all to this year's conference. We hope that wherever you're joining us from today, whether you're at home, in your office space, on a college campus, or in your car as you're dropping off kids or rushing to work, that you recognize how important it is to invest in yourself. Over the last few years, the board members at CCDA have been regularly talking about taking moments to breathe, self-care, mindfulness, and learning good, healthy habits for ourselves. We hope today, as you join this conference, you are doing exactly that. It is an honor for me to open a gathering dedicated to those of us who do the important and complex and deeply personal work of supporting others on their career journeys. As career development professionals, we know better than most that success rarely follows a straight line. And this year's theme, confidence, chaos, and compromise, couldn't be more timely or more true. Today, we gather not only to share knowledge, but to reflect honestly on the journeys that we each take in our professional and personal lives. Careers are shaped by serendipity as much as by strategy, and by unforeseen detours just as much as deliberate decisions. This theme speaks directly to the truth behind the resumes and the polished LinkedIn profiles. It reminds us that growth often begins in moments of disorder and discomfort. That meaningful progress sometimes comes not from the perfect plans, but from the imperfect negotiations with ourselves, with others, and with the systems that we all navigate. We work at the intersection of hope and uncertainty. Every day, we help others find clarity amid confusion. We help build resilience through the setbacks, and we make decisions in a world that's rarely black and white. Confidence is what we help our clients cultivate, but it's also something we must continue to nurture in ourselves as we guide others through the ever shifting landscapes. Whether it's navigating those career transitions, industry changes, redundancy, personal crossroads, we're often meeting our clients in the middle of that chaos, not to fix it all, but to help them find some sort of steady ground. And then there's the compromise, not surrendering, but the quiet, necessary art of adjusting, adapting, and making those intentional choices in a very complex world. We don't want to be perfect, but we do want to support possibility. This conference is our space to reconnect, to share stories and strategies, and to remind ourselves that we are not alone in this work. Whether you're just beginning your journey, managing change, or mentoring the next generation, I truly hope today's sessions and the conversations offer you some renewed purpose and perhaps even a little more confidence in your own path. I'm especially excited to welcome our opening keynote speaker this morning, Dr. Julie Hill, who will be sharing her insights on how we can better support clients living with chronic illness. It's a topic that speaks to both the heart and the complexity of our work. Each session offered today has been thoughtfully and intentionally designed by our professional development committee, as well as other board members, with the goal of helping you expand the tools that you have in your toolbox. As career development specialists, we're often so focused on supporting others in their career paths that we don't always pause to reflect on our own. I hope that as you participate in today's sessions, you find not just the professional insights, but also a chance to take care of yourself, to take a moment to breathe, to reflect, and to reconnect with your own journey. Thank you for the work that you do. Thank you for showing up today with your insights, with your energy, and with your commitment to this field. We're going to embrace the complexity. We're going to share generously and strengthen our collective impact that we make in the world that rarely stands still. And now I have the pleasure of turning it over to our incoming president for the 2025-2026 year, Rick. And Rick will go ahead and introduce our keynote speaker.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for being here. Welcome to this year's virtual conference. I'm so pumped for today. We have so many great speakers, and our first one is Julie Hill. I wanted to start off by introducing Julie to everyone. Julie is a professor in the Counselor Education and Supervision program in the Department of Counseling, Leadership, and Research Methods at the University of Arkansas. She's a certified rehabilitation counselor, a nationally certified counselor, a board certified telemental health provider, and a licensed professional counselor. Julie, what don't you do? You do so much. She earned her master's degree in counseling and career development from Colorado State University and her doctorate in counselor education and supervision from the University of Arkansas. I first saw Julie speak on this topic at last year's NCDA conference in San Diego, and it really resonated with me because what she was speaking about was our theme for today. We oftentimes, as career development practitioners, I don't care if you call yourself a coach or a counselor or an educator or just a friend, what we do is we help people overcome the obstacles in the way of their career path. And for some of our clients, the obstacles are different. They're not as simple as an update to some documents. For some of our clients, the ones dealing with chronic pain, illness, fatigue, etc., the career development process requires we take a different approach, and that's why Julie's here. Her personal story and her expertise are going to help you and your clients improve what happens at work and what happens at home. Julie, thank you for being here.
Right. Thank you so much for having me. Let me get this pulled up here. Okay, so thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here this morning. The title of my talk, which probably seems a little weird, is Save Our Spoons, Career Counseling for Clients with Chronic Illness. I promise I will explain the spoons and won't leave you hanging on that one. So I'm going to start by talking about myself, which feels slightly awkward for a professional conference, but I use a lot of my own story in my work, and this is why I ended up where I am. So I was born 10 weeks early. I was a preemie, so I weighed 2 pounds, 2 ounces, and I wasn't necessarily supposed to survive. Um, my mom would say that I've always been extra, and so I started that from birth. But I've been a fighter pretty much since day one. This is a picture of me in the NICU with my little fist up that I've used as a kind of a guiding light for me since I was born. From a very early age, I was obsessed with school. I wanted to go to school. I don't even know how I knew what school was, but when I was 2, I walked into the kitchen and told my mom I was ready to go to school, and she was like, "Well, you can't go to school yet, but we'll get there." So I started preschool when I was 3, and then started kindergarten at 5. That's me and my first day of kindergarten there. Um, and I started telling anyone that would listen, we ask kids a lot of times, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I would tell anybody that I wanted to be a teacher. I knew that from the time I was 3. And I was really excited to start kindergarten, but I was a week later than everybody else because we had just moved. My dad was military and we moved a lot. And so I was really nervous going to school because I didn't know anybody. It was a brand new place. But I will never forget how cared for and special my teacher made me walking into that classroom that day. And that guiding goal kind of stuck with me to be like her. Her name was Mrs. Delaney. Um, all through my school years in high school, we had to take a career exploration class, and we had to shadow somebody in a profession that you thought you wanted to be in. So I shadowed a kindergarten teacher, loved that experience. I was president of Future Educators of America, got to go to a conference, did everything I could to prepare myself to become a teacher. When I went to college, I went in with my major declared. I walked into my advisor's office. I had a plan for getting done in 3 years with all the classes mapped out. I'm sure she thought I was a little extra too. But I did it. I did my undergrad in 3 years, did my student teaching, um, and was excited to launch my career. So it took me a couple years to get my first teaching job. My major was on early childhood education, and I'd come back to Colorado, and the school district I was working in was pretty hard to get into as a first year teacher. I would have lots of interviews and would get told I was the second choice, but they were going with somebody with more experience. And I remember being really frustrated because how was I supposed to get any experience if nobody would hire me? Um, so I worked as a paraprofessional for a year and then a substitute teacher for a few months. And then in October of 2010, a part-time position opened up in the early childhood program, and I got my first teaching job. The following school year, I transitioned into early childhood special education and got a full-time position. This is my classroom. I moved to a different building and inherited a bunch of things from the previous teacher who had been there for like 30 years. When I first got into my classroom, it was floor to ceiling boxes. I became really good friends with the school custodian. It's always a good person to be friends with if you're a teacher. And I spent that whole summer getting my classroom together, getting everything just right. My mom helped me make curtains and helped me paint. And that rocking chair that you see there actually came from my nursery. So I would sit in there for circle time. And I was on cloud nine that school year. My dreams were finally coming true. I used to be in my classroom. I was in there by 6 a.m. every morning. Again, custodian and I were good friends. And then I usually left by around 5 p.m. at night. So I was tired. It was a lot of work, but I loved it. Then came a day that I will never forget. I'd been having some health issues for the past couple of years. My physical therapist sent me to a rheumatologist to find out if I had a condition that he suspected that I had. The rheumatologist confirmed that yes, I did have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. And she told me that my only hope would be to find a clinical trial, that I needed to quit my job, go on disability, and not to come back unless I had a new problem that she could actually fix. And she walked out the door. I was 25 years old and pretty devastated. EDS is a connective tissue disorder that causes joint issues, chronic pain, and a bunch of other problems. So I was wrapping my brain around that. Basically, I've just been abandoned by a doctor, and I go out to my car and I'm sobbing and I call my mom and I was like, I have no idea what I'm supposed to do next. Um, I went to my boss, told her what was going on. This was about the time we have to decide if your contract is going to be renewed, so you're going to come back for the next school year. And I told her that I wasn't going to be coming back next year, but I wanted to finish out this school year. Um, that seemed okay. She said she wanted to support me. Then within about the next 3 days, I got a phone call from the district human resources office that said that the head of HR wanted to meet with me. We get pulled into that meeting, and they start the meeting by telling me that I was being removed from my classroom and separated from my contract. And there was nothing I could do about that. They saw me as too big of a liability in the classroom. So I was told I had 2 weeks to wrap everything up and hand it over to a new teacher. Um, Again, still in shock from the whole diagnosis thing, and now this is happening to me. I tried to reason with them. I was like, can I have an extra paraprofessional so I don't have to do the lifting? Um, and they were just dead set against that. So that was a Friday, and on Monday I had a substitute teacher in my classroom. I did my kindergarten readiness assessment with the kids, finished up all of our other evaluation materials, and then had to say goodbye. And it was probably one of the worst days of my life having to say goodbye to these kids, who, for some of them, I was their only stable figure in their life. They didn't end up being able to find somebody qualified to take my position, so they hired a general education teacher and two part-time special education teachers for my one position. And I had a parent who refused to do an IEP meeting with anyone else other than me. So I came back in and did her IEP meeting even when I wasn't working for them. So my last day in my classroom was February 11th. And I gave myself one day to have a pity party and to be sad and lay on the couch and cry and be upset. And then I was like, and then I got to figure out what I'm doing next because going on disability is not a choice for me right now. So I started looking at different options since my undergraduate degree was now useless. I didn't want to go into administration. I didn't want to become a principal. I didn't want to go with older kids. And I had talked to our school counselor about her program and looked I was living in Fort Collins, Colorado at the time. Colorado State University has the Counseling and Career Development program. And I looked, the application deadline was a week away. So I had a week to get my stuff together and turned in and made the deadline, had an interview, and luckily was accepted. So just a note about EDS. So our symbol is the zebra. I intentionally wore zebras on my shirt today. I don't know if you can tell that that's what those are, but in medical school, they teach doctors if you hear hoofbeats, assume it's a horse, meaning don't think outside of the box. It's probably something really typical and normal. And we say sometimes it's a zebra, meaning we're a little outside of the normal. And May is actually Ehlers-Danlos Awareness Month. So there's a lot of awareness activities going on right now. Over the next several years, I would continue to get diagnosed with chronic illnesses. It's kind of like Pokemon, I guess. You got to catch them all. And so I would eventually get diagnosed with postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome and some other things. I jokingly tell people EDS is what would happen if Gumby and Humpty Dumpty had a kid, if that gives you any indication of what it's like to live with that. Some of you may be too young to get that reference, but so I started at Colorado State in the fall of 2011, and I was terrified. I remember sitting in my first class, and all the doubts were running through my mind. What if I'm terrible at this? What if the only thing I was ever good at was being a teacher? What if nobody likes me? What if the professors are mean? Like, what if I don't fit in here? And luckily, I had the kindest, gentlest, sweetest person in the entire world teaching my class, and quickly realized that, okay, I could do this. It was going to be okay. I had amazing faculty and mentors that really kind of guided me through this journey because not only was I trying to figure out my career, but I was still trying to figure out my new identity because my identity felt like it had been taken away from me my whole life. I'd identified as wanting to be a teacher, being a teacher, all those things, and that was now gone. And I didn't know who I was. So I was trying to figure out who I was, how to navigate this body that doesn't want to cooperate with me, and go to grad school at the same time. My mentor, Jackie, is pictured here, was the person that introduced me to career construction theory and would let me sit in her office and cry and when I was struggling. And she did the career construction interview with me one time when I was in her office, upset and freaking out about not knowing what I was doing with my life. And I can honestly say that that experience changed my life without exaggerating. It took me 3 years to graduate instead of two, like normal. It was the case. I had surgery every semester I was in the master's program, including brain and spine surgery in New York right before I started internship. But I made it. And I did my internship in an academic advising office, and they hired me as an academic advisor and instructor for human development and family studies right about the time I was graduating. I really enjoyed some aspects of that job. I kind of became known as the chronic illness magnet at CSU, and I'd have students showing up in my office that weren't in my major. I'd have the health center call me and be like, we need to send someone over to talk to you. And I was like, you do realize I'm like an academic advisor. I'm not working in any official counseling capacity right now. But usually if a student showed up at the door of the advising office crying, they'd be like, Julie, this one's yours. So I decided to start a student organization. We were called the CSU Spoonies, and it was a student organization for students with chronic illness and those who wanted to be allies or helpers to that population. We fought some systemic issues at CSU. We got to meet with the university president and tell him what it was like to be a student with a chronic illness on that campus. And I really enjoyed doing that work and getting to work with those students. But I kept encountering issues, systemic issues, ableism, all kinds of things, and wanted to fix or improve those. And I kept being told you can't actually make any changes unless you have the letters PhD behind your name. So I said, okay, fine, I'll do that. I'll go get a PhD. So I applied and was accepted at the University of Arkansas and picked up my whole life and moved to a place where I knew one person. And again, those same doubts came back around. Like, okay, I made it through a master's program, but can I do a PhD? Can I do these statistics classes? Like, these people around me are all really smart. What am I doing here? And I took coursework in rehabilitation, counseling, and knew I wanted to do something around chronic illness for my dissertation, but didn't know exactly what I wanted to focus on. And I ended up deciding to focus on career construction theory and looking at as an intervention for individuals facing a forced career transition due to the onset or worsening of chronic illness. So I did that. I'll talk about why in just a minute, but this was from my dissertation defense and graduation, and it was a very long 4 years. Again, brain surgery in there, and the PhD program is not for the weak, I will say that. But I made it. While I was in the PhD program, I was still in touch with one of my professors from my several of the professors from my master's program, but one in particular that was pretty involved with Mark Savickas and his Career Construction Institute. And as I was talking to this person on the phone one day, he said, if you want to do anything related to career construction, you have to go learn from Mark himself. And this is one of those things that I will always be grateful for. And I say that I try to pay it forward whenever I can. I was making $1,000 a month as a graduate student. I did not have a lot of discretionary income. And that particular mentor said he would pay for my plane ticket so I could go to Ohio and go to the Career Construction Institute. I got a scholarship to pay for the registration, and then one of my professors in my doc program used grant money that he had to help me pay for the hotel. So there was no way I could say no to that, looking that opportunity in the face. And I will never forget, I walked in to registration and Mark's daughter was there running the registration table, and she goes, "Oh, you're Julie." And at first I was like, "How do you know who I am?" And then I realized I had sent them a picture. Um, and she said, "Let me come introduce you to my dad." And I freaked out. I was like, "Wait, what? No, I'm not ready to meet Mark Savickas. Like, nope, can't. Can you give me 5 minutes?" And she was like, "Come on, let's go." And we walk into this room and he's sitting there talking to people. She taps him on the shoulder and says, "Hi, Dad, this is Julie." And I just was frozen. I didn't know what to do. But if you've ever met Mark, you know how nice and gentle and kind he is. And so we talked for a few minutes. And then I surprised myself by volunteering to be the client for him when he does his demonstration of the career construction interview. I am like a 99% I on the Myers-Briggs. And so getting up in front of 75 people and being very vulnerable was scary. But I was like, I came all the way here. I might as well take every advantage of getting the opportunity to do this. So I did, and it was an incredible experience. Um, and I got the opportunity to go to dinner with Mark and some of the other faculty members there and talk about what I was thinking for my dissertation. And I left there knowing exactly what I wanted to do for my dissertation. So I got my first job right after graduation. I was offered an assistant professor position at Auburn University. So graduation was on a Saturday. Sunday, my car was packed and I moved to Alabama and started my new job on Tuesday. And really enjoyed a lot of that job. I had great students that I worked with. I had some really good faculty, but I was missing some family connection. And I had a niece and two nephews, and really wanted to be a part of their life growing up, and be a good kind of role model and figure for them. And the University of Arkansas had been recruiting me to come back. And so last year, I came back to the U of A. I'll talk about that in just a second. One of the highlights of my time at Auburn was, professors have to have a research agenda. And I decided I really wanted to focus on Ehlers-Danlos syndrome and try to help other people. So I had the opportunity to go to their International Scientific Symposium in Rome, and present on my research and get to network with all the names that I'd been citing and talk to other professionals, and share my story a little bit there too. So this is the CEO of the Ehlers-Danlos Society, Lara Bloom, on the left there. And then that was my colleague and I presenting on our work looking at quality of life and adaptation for individuals with EDS. So last year I moved back to Fayetteville to be a Razorback again, and it was a little trippy to be a professor now in the same building where I had been a student for so long. But I just finished up my second year here. This week was finals, and I've really gotten to help shape the rehabilitation counseling program and make some changes, hopefully for the better. So, like I said, my research agenda really focuses on quality of life, coping, adaptation, and adjustment for individuals with chronic illness and disability, with a special focus on Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. So, really trying to make it so that other people don't have to go through what I went through. The average time to diagnosis for somebody with EDS is 10 years. And there's a lot of issues with the medical system, with functioning, with like nobody has any coping skills. It's just a really neglected population. And so I just wrapped up my second study. I've got two more in the works, really hoping to kind of change the landscape of what healthcare, mental health care, counseling looks like for individuals with EDS. In July of last year, I started my own private practice called Spoonie Strong Counseling and Career Development, and I do focus on mental health counseling for individuals with chronic illness. That's my whole client population right now, and then as well as career counseling for anybody, but I tend to attract those that have chronic illness, and helping them kind of navigate those career uncertainties, career transitions, mostly through career construction interviewing. Okay, so that's my story. That's where I'm coming from in this. And now I just want to talk a little bit about general things that happen when you're living with a chronic illness or a chronic disease. So the definition of chronic diseases are long-lasting conditions that can usually be controlled but not cured. So there's a lot of management that happens and trial and error, but there's no cure at the end of the day. People living with chronic illnesses often must manage daily symptoms that affect their quality of life and oftentimes experience acute health problems and complications that can shorten their life expectancy. So we live with the chronic part of things, and then acute things pop up. And sometimes when you're a normal person sick, on top of being chronically sick, it's just a whole mess and can be really hard to navigate. So some examples of chronic illnesses: diabetes, multiple sclerosis, rheumatoid arthritis, asthma, lupus, ulcerative colitis. And no two people with the same condition are going to be exactly the same. You meet one person with chronic illness, you've met one person with chronic illness. We all kind of navigate things differently, and have different resources. Sometimes the condition is relatively stable and stays the same throughout someone's life. Sometimes, like multiple sclerosis, it might be relapsing or remitting, so that you have periods of flare, periods of remission, and then it may also be degenerative, so something that gets worse as time goes on. The statistics right now say about 129 million people in the United States have at least one chronic illness. Most people have more than one chronic illness. And I would imagine this statistic, I believe, was pre-COVID. I think after COVID, this population has grown immensely due to long COVID and the complications that we've seen from that. All right, now what you've been waiting for, what the heck is about the spoons? So the spoon theory was created by a woman with lupus and was a way for her to explain to her friends and family what it was really like to live with a chronic illness. So spoons equate to tasks of daily living. If you are a healthy individual, you have an unlimited number of spoons to get through your day. If you are somebody with a chronic illness, you have a finite number of spoons. So let's say that you have 15 spoons, and it takes one to get out of bed, two to take a shower, make breakfast. So you're already 5 spoons down and you haven't even left your house yet to go to work. And so a lot of what happens is we tell individuals to use their spoons wisely. So figure out what you can do and what you can't do, because you don't want to get to the end of your workday and have no spoons left to be able to come home, make dinner, maybe have a little bit of free time, and then go to bed. Oftentimes you can maybe borrow one from the next day, but inevitably you'll pay for that. I debated about sharing this, and I think I'm going to share it, but I'm about to make myself even more vulnerable than I already have. Um, but it relates to what we're talking about here. So I've been in a flare for the last 2 weeks. I've been in and out of the emergency room, um, lots of doctor's issues going on, and it really takes a toll on my mental health. So I've been dealing with active suicidal ideation for the last 2 weeks because of my chronic illness and because of the flare that I've been in. And it's really easy to get into a point of no one knows how to help me, and I feel very alone. So I've been operating kind of on negative spoons for the last week, and I was really hoping that it wouldn't mean that I couldn't be here today. So I'm glad that my body at least hung in there for me to be able to be here today. But I think it's really important, no matter what your role is, what your title that you use is to also be aware of safety planning, because you may be the safe person if you're not working as a mental health counselor. Jackie always told us nobody ever comes in just for a resume. Um, they may not have a mental health counselor, they may not have a good mental health counselor. Your clients dealing with chronic illness, you may be the safe person that gets the disclosure that they're struggling with their mental health. And even if you don't have a background in mental health, um, please do yourself a favor and your clients a favor and get up to speed on what it means to do a safety plan and what it means to help navigate those challenges with clients so that you can react appropriately if you do get that disclosure, or you are the person that is the safe person that they come to help them navigate this situation. So this was especially true for me. And I see this a lot in the clients that I work with in my dissertation. So, this idea that chronically ill persons frequently experience a crumbling away of their former self images without a simultaneous development of equally valued new ones. I was lucky. I figured out a pivot and a plan and had people helping me work on my finding my new identity, but not everyone is that lucky. Not everyone has those resources. And so you may see someone that has no idea who they are anymore. And so you're working not only on helping them navigate career challenges, but also identity. Who are they? Who do they want to be? Who are they capable of being? So, living with a chronic illness, you deal a lot with physical symptoms and restrictions: pain, fatigue, brain fog, lifting restrictions, standing restrictions, things like that. There's also a lot of social and emotional restrictions and obstacles that come along the way. We know that chronic illness affects mental health. You're a lot more likely to be living with anxiety and depression if you have a chronic illness. Social situations are hard to navigate. Friends leave. People decide that you're too much and they don't want to deal with you anymore. They stop inviting you, or you really want to go to a social situation, but don't have enough spoons to get there. And so you feel like you're always telling the person, no, I'm sorry. And eventually they stop asking. There's also a lot of identity confusion. Who am I? Am I my illness? Is my illness who I am? Is that all of who I am? Can I be somebody other than a sick person? Or does that have to be my whole identity? And then functional limitations, energy limiting conditions. There's going to be a limit to how much you can engage, how many hours maybe you can work, what you can pick up. And that's if you don't have anything else outside of work that you're doing. Most people have families and things like that that they need to be engaged with and taken care of. So there's also real functional limitations that come along with living with chronic illness. So when we think about career and chronic illness, a lot is dependent on where an individual is in their career stage when they are diagnosed or become symptomatic. I was at the beginning of my career, and so I was I wouldn't say I wasn't as attached, but it was a little bit easier for me to pivot and think of something different. If you've been in a career for 20 years and all of a sudden that's no longer an option for you, it can be a lot more challenging to figure out what you're going to do next. Research has shown four major career paths: plateauing, redirecting, retreating, and self-employment. And we're going to talk about each of those in just a minute. I want to highlight this concept of career self-efficacy. So we know that self-efficacy is our belief in our ability to accomplish something. Career self-efficacy is our belief in our ability to have a meaningful career, to be established in our career, and to have that career that means something to you. You may be dealing with a lot of low career self-efficacy for individuals with chronic illness, especially those that are younger and haven't started yet, because it can just feel really overwhelming. How do I figure out what I'm capable of doing? How do I navigate my limitations? How do I disclose all of this? And so it can be really important to examine the client's career self-efficacy beliefs. So plateauing, that is not always voluntary, but it means that advancement is likely not going to happen and the individual is going to stay in a job role for an extended period of time, maybe when they shouldn't even, they should have gone for a promotion or they should have left to pursue other opportunities. So plateauing can happen because people fear discrimination. Ableism is alive and well in our workforce, and we oftentimes, if you've disclosed to one person and gotten accommodations, but moving positions is going to mean disclosing to someone new, asking for accommodations again. People are afraid of discrimination and afraid of being judged or targeted because they are somebody with a chronic illness. People may also be afraid to lose their health insurance. Prior to the Affordable Care Act, you could be turned away from health insurance if it wasn't group health insurance. And I know there's things going on right now that are maybe trying to change that. So health insurance is extremely important when you have a chronic illness. And so maybe they don't want to lose or change their health insurance because of changing positions. There's also this fear of job lock, so getting stuck in a position where you aren't able to advance or that you are probably overqualified for that position, but you're afraid, again, for all these reasons of moving or changing. And then we see a lot of that low career self-efficacy beliefs. I don't believe that I can have what it takes to be a manager or in a higher position or changing positions and starting new roles and responsibilities. Let me just stick with what I know because it's safe. So redirecting happens when a person chooses to change careers, usually to a different kind of work, because future health problems were anticipated that could interfere with success in their current or desired career path. So this is what I did. I redirected. And as much as I loved my job as a preschool special education teacher, now, 15 years later, there's no way I could be doing that job. My body would not be having it. So I was able to anticipate what was going to happen, kind of. There's a lot of uncertainty with chronic illness and rare diseases. Nobody could tell me when things were going to get worse, if things were going to get better. I had some doctors saying things would get better with menopause or things would get worse with menopause. I was also 25, so menopause feels like a really long way away at that time. Not so much these days. But this is where I see clients a lot, is this redirecting, and this is where you can really make a big difference in helping them figure out where they're redirecting to and what their new possibilities are. Retreating happens when a person willfully decides to decrease their work effort. So maybe they're going to go to a less demanding job or reducing their hours, going from full-time to part-time. I had to do that in my first job out of graduate school. I went from 5 days a week to 4 days a week and a day remotely, and then went just down to 4 days a week because it was too much for me to handle Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. Retreating may indicate low career self-efficacy beliefs and low coping efficacy beliefs, but it may also just be the easier option. So it doesn't always have to be a bad thing, especially if it's a conscious choice. Now, if it's happening without someone's control, then that would be a different situation. Self-employment, Self-employment, this one researcher calls it opting out of the career game. Individuals usually are looking for flexibility and autonomy because a Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, 40-hour or 40 more than 40 hours work week isn't going to work for them. We may see a decrease in self-efficacy there due to those obstacles created by their symptoms and how others responded to the individual's illness. Did they have a doctor tell them, you can't do this anymore and give them no hope? What are they thinking? So when we think about the benefits of work for chronic illness, we know there's a lot of positive benefits for it. The schedule and structure of a workplace can be really helpful. I know what I need to do. I know what time I need to be there. I know when my breaks are. I have tasks. I'll be honest, work is the thing that got me through these last 2 weeks because if I was thinking about work and I was thinking about my work duties, I wasn't able to think about everything else that was going on. Now, did I work from the floor of my office laying down on a beanbag chair? Yes, I did. But I was able to use work as a distraction. So we know that work contributes to psychological well-being. If you have a reason to get out of bed in the morning and a place to go, that makes a huge difference for your well-being. Anybody that's ever had the flu, even for a couple of days, you know how down that can make you feel and feeling like when you can't get out of bed, that's what people with chronic illness, some of them feel like all the time. There's a social identity. When we meet people, what's usually the first question that you ask someone? What do you do for a living? Or what kind of work do you do? And so having that social identity of who you are through your work can help you feel not so much just like a sick person. Financial security. I don't know if anybody knows, but if you get about $1,000 a month on disability, that is not a lot of money. We can barely make it work in Arkansas, let alone somewhere like California. And it's expensive to have a chronic illness. There are treatments and medications and braces and splints and therapies, and it's expensive. So we need to have some sort of financial security there, a job that helps you pay your bills. And we know that the role of work is considered a valuable and fundamental part of our identity. So when we think about work and chronic illness, I really like this quote. For many people with chronic illness, their illness changes their identity and how they can see themselves. Experience of chronic illness can have a dramatic effect on an individual's identity, which may lead the individual to reevaluate themselves and the goals they have set for their life. This is probably where people are going to be when they come to see you. I know something needs to change, but I don't know how to do it myself. I didn't know what a career counselor was when I was going through my change, and probably would have really helped me to talk to somebody. I just figured it out, but it probably would have been a lot easier if I'd had somebody to talk to that could help me navigate this change and this challenge, figure out what I still had, what were transferable skills that I had, what were my options. And so this place of uncertainty and the unknown is where a lot of people with chronic illness live and where they may be when they show up in your office. There's a lot of workplace fears that happen with chronic illness. So this idea of job lock, I have to stay in this job because I'm not good at doing something else. I can't take a risk. I can't lose the benefits that I have. I've already disclosed my illness to my boss now. I don't want to have to disclose to somebody new. This idea of presenteeism, which is showing up for work when you shouldn't. This was me this week. I showed up for work even when I literally was passing out and laying on the floor because I had stuff I had to get done. It's the end of the semester. Grades are due. Things are due. And if I don't pull my weight, then I'm going to get judged by my coworkers. If I take too many sick days, I can't take another one. People at work are sick of hearing that I don't feel well and things like that. And so showing up when you really probably shouldn't be showing up is presenteeism. And then this idea of workplace spillover. So asking for accommodations is too much to ask. I don't deserve that. It's giving me special treatment, which is not true, by the way. What if I can never work again? What if the way you slept the night before, if you're running on 2 hours of sleep, that's going to spill over into your work performance and your ability to show up and do your job. If you're in a flare, then you're just going to be distracted and it might be hard to concentrate. So there's no way to just, there's no button someone can push and be like, turn off my chronic illness for the 8-hour workday. I would love it if that button existed, but it doesn't exist. And there's no separating the fact that you live with a chronic illness from work. All right, so let's talk about interventions for career exploration, things you can do with clients to help them. This quote comes from Mark Savickas: actively master what we passively suffer. Passive suffering is a huge issue in chronic illness. There's so many things out of our control. Things I can't control maybe. Am I going to be able to eat today? Am I going to be able to get out of bed? Am I going to be able to drive to work? All of that feels like it's happening to you and you don't have any say in the matter. So it's time to flip that script and help master that passive suffering. And that is what career construction interviewing can do. I highly recommend this book, Career Construction Theory. You can get it on Amazon for $10. And it's a really great book for giving you a detailed look at how to do career construction interviewing. So some of the benefits is we help foster self-completion, help people derive meaning from their experiences, coming from that pain and turning it into something that you can use as a skill and an asset, increases in satisfaction and happiness. So we know from research, career construction and counseling promotes subjective well-being. If you only have time to ask one of the questions, ask the role model question, because that one really helps remind people of who they are, not as a sick person, not as a healthy person, not as anything else, but other than who they are at their core. My dissertation did find that this was beneficial when working with individuals facing a forced career transition due to chronic illness. So this quote came from one of my participants. There is such high anxiety when you're dealing with your future. The ambiguity and the high anxiety of having chronic illness as well as trying to figure out your next steps. It's very heavy and it's very hard. And so having a holistic understanding of who you are and having it done in such a gentle assessment, I think it really helps to give that person a little bit of their power back. And it really does. It just kind of sets it like gentle ripples into motion of my thoughts and themselves and seeing themselves rather than broken and half able or whatever. Really seeing them as, okay, these are the things that I'm still capable of, that are still valuable in me. There's so much wrapped up in that quote, but this idea that through career construction interviewing, we can be reminded of who we are at our core, outside of our illness, but you need some help to do that. And so by asking the role model question, rather than asking somebody, what are your strengths? What do you feel like you're good at? Because that question is really hard to answer. But then giving them the words and giving them the ability to take back that part of their identity and replace some of those faulty beliefs with positive ones. I really love using card sorts. This is just one that I've used before. This is the work-life balance one. And so you go through different cards, put them in these categories. If I already have enough, I want more of this, I don't need this right now. And then using those to kind of set some goals. So work-life balance is important for everybody, but it's extra important for those with chronic illness because they need that time away from work to recover and be able to recoup some of those spoons. And so balancecardsorts.com, Anush has some great ones there. There's some other ones out there too. But again, and it gives people something tactile. You can do them digitally, but I'm old school and I like to do them with people putting their hands on things, usually spread out all over the floor of my office. But it really gives them kind of a launch point to set some goals of I need to work on this, or I need to improve this, or I need more of this, or I can take this off my plate so that I can be more functional. So some interventions that research has shown to help empower, we want to empower workers to manage their disability or chronic illness, but also be able to maintain their careers. It's essentially managing a disability or chronic illness is a full-time job on top of a full-time job. And so it really we need to empower individuals to be able to do both of those things. So a place to start is helping increase the client knowledge about their specific chronic illness. Um, Not everyone, I have a brain that likes research and likes to go look at things. Not everyone has those skills. And if you try to navigate medical literature and um, scientific papers, clinical trials, things like that, it can be really overwhelming and confusing. So helping the client know about their illness, what can they expect? What does the course look like? What are treatment options? How do I self-manage symptoms? What are my legal rights? Because do have protections under the Americans with Disabilities Act, but a lot of people don't know that or don't think of themselves as disabled and so don't know that those protections apply to them. They also don't know that you can request workplace accommodations under the Americans with Disabilities Act, and those can be put in place to help mitigate some of the effects of their chronic illness. And those aren't special privileges, they aren't special treatment. The whole point is we're just trying to level the playing field and allow somebody to have the same access to work as somebody without a disability. Also helping them understand workplace barriers because there's still a lot of stigma. There's a lot of misunderstanding. There's a lot of red tape that like the act of requesting accommodations can be a really lengthy, convoluted process. So helping them understand those barriers and how to overcome those barriers. Then we want to help develop their competencies. So help develop accommodation planning. What would be reasonable accommodations? How do I request those? How do I put those into place? And then how do I know if they're working? Is it something that I need to go back and try again? Or maybe it worked for a couple years and now my illness has gotten worse and I need more accommodations. Accommodations are not a one and done deal. You can reevaluate and go back and change those as needed. Research has shown that some people would rather quit their job than ask for accommodations. So we want to help increase the use of work accommodations so that we don't have people quitting their job, leaving employment just because they don't feel like they can request accommodation. So looking at what are some retention strategies? Maybe do we restructure your workday? Do you do part of your work remotely? How do I manage my illness when I'm in a flare and working? How do I manage it maybe when it's calmed down? What does that mean at work? Maybe I know how to manage at home, but how do I translate that into managing at work? There's a lot of this idea of anticipatory coping. So it's best to do this when somebody is stable and not in a flare because it can be harder to think about when you're overwhelmed with not feeling well. So thinking about what you're like when you're in a flare to put into place some coping strategies that you can pull from when the person is in a flare. And again, accommodations, when we think about accommodations, be proactive about those. Request what you would need in the worst case scenario. And maybe you don't need those every day, but you need them some of the time. And so having those in place when you need them rather than having to go through the process and the red tape of getting accommodations in place when you're really doing poorly can make a difference. And it really should be a collaboration with the employer. But sometimes employers are scary to talk to, and so we may need to help clients navigate how do I have these conversations? What do I say? Maybe you role play it and help them kind of navigate those and anticipate what that conversation might look like. So there was one research study that looked at different interventions for job retention, and one of them was a 6-week coaching program that kind of covered a lot of what I've just talked about. These were individuals with living with chronic illness and working full time. And the program found that they improved their workability, had greater mental resources, showed more resilience, and had that core like self-beliefs and self-evaluations of themselves improved. And burnout decreased. It's amazing what a difference having resources and feeling less alone can make in this process. And they found that after about 12 weeks, the effects were stable and those positive effects were still in place. So this is a great resource as we're talking about accommodation planning. It's called the Job Accommodation Network, askjan.org. You can go on there. They have resources for employers, resources for individuals. You can use this A to Z function to sort by the type of chronic illness or disability. You can sort by accommodations needed, and it'll give you ideas. So they actually have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome on there. So I can go and look and see what are the suggested accommodations for Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. They've got chronic fatigue syndrome, lupus, multiple sclerosis, brain injury, all sorts of things on there. You can also search by job function. So if you're having a hard time with this, what are some accommodations that might help mitigate that? And then they also have, you can contact them. They have tons of resources. They'll talk you through things. They can talk to your employer, give you ideas about how to work with an employer on accommodations. So this is a completely free resource, and I highly recommend checking out Jan. And then the last resource that I just want to talk about is state vocational rehabilitation. So if you're not aware of it, rehab counseling and vocational rehabilitation helps individuals with disabilities and chronic illness find and maintain employment. So, and they're able to help pay for trainings or accommodations or schooling if someone needs to go back to school. And the eligibility is that you have to have a disability or chronic illness, and they have to have reasonable knowledge that you'll benefit from going through vocational rehabilitation. So you're able to go to work. And so this is a great resource. Again, I had no idea this was a thing when I was navigating my own experience, but it can be a great resource to collaborate with and provide funding sources for things that can be expensive, especially if we're looking at somebody needing to complete maybe a certification program or another degree or anything like that. And every state has vocational rehabilitation agencies. And they're spread throughout the US. There's also special agencies for individuals that are blind and visually impaired under there, and deaf and hard of hearing. So I kind of want to wrap things up with this quote. Sometimes you have to let go of the picture of what you thought life would be like. Sorry, didn't click. And learn to find joy in the story you're actually living. One of the great privileges of our job is we get to help people reinvent themselves. And we can be that source of hope when the person doesn't feel hopeful, and navigating new stories, reauthoring the stories that have been told, and taking back that control over a situation that feels out of control. So as I wrap things up, some last recommendations to you all. Get to know the chronic illness community. I'm not expecting you to go to medical school, I'm not expecting you to know everything there is about every chronic illness, but some ways you can engage with the chronic illness community. There's a website called The Mighty, and they offer stories, firsthand stories of individuals with different disabilities and chronic illness. There's a website called Inspire that has different forums for people with different chronic illnesses to get support. Reddit, TikTok, social media. Find the people with chronic illness and listen to their stories. See what it's like. Put yourselves in their shoes just for a little bit, so that when somebody does come to you, you have some idea of what they've been through and what they're talking about. Create your own toolkit. Find what works for you. Have your toolkit available to pull from. And again, to reiterate, understanding safety planning and crisis resources too. Have that in your toolkit. Know where you can send people. What are the resources like 988, hospitals, mental health counselors that you can refer to. Um, if you want to learn more about career construction interviewing, Mark Savickas is doing a professional development institute at NCDA this summer in Atlanta. It's a 4-hour PDI with him, and he'll demonstrate the career construction interviewing. Um, but I would just encourage all of you to come to NCDA too, and see and learn from the other professionals there. Thank you to Rick and CCDA for having me today. And I think I left enough time for some questions if there are questions out there.
Yes, thank you. There's so much time for questions. Please put those questions in the chat. I'm actually going to throw something in the chat right now. There's an evaluation form. We really appreciate any sort of feedback, suggestions, thoughts. That's where you could put it right there in that survey. We do have some questions to get to, but before we get to those, Julie, is it possible for you to show us, you had mentioned a website, I think it was Jan, is that right?
Mhm.
Is it possible for you to show us how to work that?
Yes.
Sweet. And while Julie does that, please throw any questions you have in the chat. I'm going to be organizing them and we'll get to them soon.
Lovely. Okay. Of course, now my computer's not going to cooperate. There we go. Okay. Can you see that screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So this is Jan. So there's resources here for employers. So those that have private businesses, small businesses, federal employers, state and local government, resources for individuals here, and then for others. This A to Z list is what I was talking about before. So if you can filter by disability. So
Wow.
here's a whole bunch of different disabilities there. So let's just pick fibromyalgia for one. It gives you information about what fibromyalgia is, how the Americans with Disabilities Act comes into play, and how to accommodate individuals. Then they have accommodation ideas by limitation. So, managing time. And they'll give you different products here that can help with that and services. You can also look by work-related function. So noise. Here are different products that could help with dealing with noise if that's something that is overwhelming. So if you like noise canceling headsets, they'll give
Mm,
you, here's some resources for places you can buy those. Here's some recommended ones, and where you can get those. And so that is a really great resource, the A to Z lists. So you can also then search by limitation. So let's say the person's disability wasn't on the list, but now here's what they're having trouble with. So they're having trouble with standing. Um, Here are some solutions for that over here. So like adjustable drafting tables, lifts and office chairs, ergonomic tools. And it'll give you some vendors and places where you can go to find those so that you're not having to start from zero. Um, and then you can also search by work-related function. So there's different functions there by topic. And then you can also search by accommodations if you're just trying to figure out where to start there. So I really like Jan. They're also really great. They have a good resource. They're willing to talk with people. There's, again, like I said, there's information for employers. Employers oftentimes are confused about accommodations. They don't know that there's
mhm.
tax incentives out there. There's things to help with that, and different ways that they can help that. So I really, really like Jan. It's a great resource.
Awesome. Thanks so much for sharing that. We do have some questions and we have lots of time that we can get to them. So I'm going to try and go through them in the order that they were placed. The first one that we had was uh, uh, about an estimate. So what approximate percentage of the general population is suffering from chronic illness? I think you had mentioned a statistic, but do you know what the percentage of that is, Julie?
The statistic that I had was 129 million. But like I said, that was a pre-COVID statistic. I would say we're probably looking, they say about 1 in 6 people have a disability, and chronic illness sometimes gets lumped into that, sometimes it doesn't, but it affects quite a few people. I think looking at like 1 in 4 right now.
Wow, that's pretty significant.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. Let me go to the second question that we had here. So someone sent this one in. We have quite a bit. So where is it? Here we go. Do you have any suggestions about applying for jobs with chronic illness?
Yeah. So I definitely encourage clients to do their homework and see if they can figure out how friendly an employer is, as well as picking things that are the least bit challenging for them. So using their
Mhm.
strengths, not focusing so much on their limitations. The idea of disclosure is always a really hard one. When do you disclose and how do you disclose? And some people have the luxury of being able to pass as healthy, other people don't.
Yeah.
So that's going to come into play. So I know for me, when I was looking for faculty jobs, I disclosed in my cover letter because I was like, I have chronic illness. This brings me an important perspective when I'm talking to students. And
Hmm.
I just put it out there like that because I didn't want to work for someone that wasn't going to be, that if they didn't want to hire me because of that reason, then I didn't want to work for them. Um, but I think and there's some employers that tend to be a little more disability friendly. Um, so doing some homework around that, seeing if you can talk to other people who work there, and then figuring out for each individual when and how they want to disclose. Do they need accommodations to fill out the job application? Do they need accommodations to be able to show up for the interview? That's going to mean that you need to disclose as soon as possible.
Hmm.
For others, they may choose to wait until they are um, in the job and then find out who they're supposed to talk to for accommodations and request accommodations then. So it's a really individual choice that kind of needs to be navigated person by person.
Yeah, and we actually had another question that was similar to that about at what point in the application process do you suggest an applicant disclose their disability if they want to at all? Is there a time that if they want to disclose it, they should?
It's really individual to each person. I usually recommend if you can wait until you're in the job to disclose, because
Hmm.
while legally they're not allowed to discriminate against you for a disability, there are ways around that, and people may have a misunderstanding or lack of understanding about what it means to be working with a disability or a chronic illness. And so they may make assumptions about you that aren't true. And you may miss out on opportunities because someone is making a judgment that isn't really true. So let them see you work for a little bit. Now, of course, if you need accommodations from the get-go, um,
Hmm.
disclose earlier. But if you can get established in there and then find out who specifically you need to talk to, because you don't have to disclose to everyone. Um, it's usually one person that is like, they may have different names, accommodations coordinator, HR, depending on how big the organization you're working for is. But if you don't want to disclose to everyone, you don't have to. There's one person that you may need to disclose to. Maybe you're like me and you tell everyone, everyone knows anyway, my office is covered in zebras and you can't get away from it. But that's also part of the illness identity journeys. How comfortable are
Hmm.
you with your own understanding of your condition and awareness about it and telling other people?
Yeah, that's great. So I have another question. We have a few more questions to get to, and please, if you have any more questions, throw them in the chat or the Q&A, and we'll try and get to them. Here's a question. What do you recommend our clients do about work expectations while they're waiting for their diagnosis? So you had mentioned that sometimes diagnosis can take a long time. What do
Mhm.
you recommend they do while they wait for that?
You can still request accommodations without a specific diagnosis. It just has to be that you're dealing with a condition that majorly limits one or more life activity. That's what the law says. And so if you know that you have functional limitations, but you're still waiting for a diagnosis, you don't have to go to HR and say, I have this, so I need this. You can say there are some work aspects of my work that I'm having a hard time with, and I would like to come up with solutions for those. And here's my suggestions. A lot of times, as part of the accommodations process, you do have to get medical documentation. So a doctor has to fill out a form that says that yes, you need this, or these are what you would need. But you don't have to have a specific diagnosis. The functional limitations and the symptoms are enough to get accommodations.
Yeah. Okay. We did have another question. I guess this one is similar, but I'll do it. Do you have any, I'm sorry, hold on. Yeah, do you have any advice about types of jobs that can be more accommodating for people with chronic illness?
Yeah, so generally more sedentary jobs are going to be better. And using, again, those accommodations. But I think the big thing outside of type of job is fit, because we're a lot more likely to be able to overcome or persevere through challenges when we care about the work that we're doing. I know for me that's true. I really, really like my job, and so I'm willing to show up when I don't feel well and when I don't actually want to be working. So finding a job that means something to somebody, whatever that may be. But again, probably thinking about more sedentary type jobs where you're not necessarily having to be on your feet all day or doing hard labor, manual labor, things like that. But finding that job that is going to be the reason that somebody gets out of bed and hopefully is a benefit rather than yet another obstacle to overcome.
Yeah, yeah. We have a question about, it's a pretty complex one. So it has a lot to do with not being labeled as unreliable, unmotivated, and it's sort of the stigma or the ableism narratives that we have in our culture. And they ask, do you have any additional tips or best practices for helping clients navigate these harmful narratives? And there was another one here as well about accommodation planning, which might be similar. Do you have any additional tips on how we can do the accommodation planning and help people navigate?
So using Jan, pulling in their resources, as far as, gosh, combating ableism and stigma, that could be a whole nother talk. But I think where we come from that is helping people find their tribe. And so that they have people in their life that are supportive, that understand who they are outside of their illness, so that if they do, when, I'm not going to say if, when they deal with that systemic issue of ableism and maybe not being able to show up the way you want to do, that you have people in your life that know who you are and know what you're capable of even when you don't. So finding those support people, like for me, I belong to several EDS groups. That's where I will go and I'm like, I don't know what to do here. Or does anybody have experience with this? My family tries. They try really hard, but at the end of the day, they don't get it. They
Yeah,
don't know what it's like. So finding those people who are in your similar situation, finding mentors, finding who those people are that have been there, that will listen. Hopefully, finding a really good mental health counselor. There's not as many that are well versed in chronic illness as I would like there to be, but we're working on it. Um, but finding those people that are going to be there for you and understand what you're going through so that when you are encountering ableism and stigma and discrimination, that you have a place to go to talk about that and process that, and it doesn't just all get heavy and hard and weigh on you.
that's definitely part of the tribe, definitely part of the support. You know, we have a question here about that type of support. So there's a question about caregivers who are for the first time experiencing this too. They asked, do you have any recommendations for couples slash families making career changes and decisions to cope with illness and treatments, uh, uh, I guess related to these issues? Do you have any tips on that?
I've seen a lot of relationships go south with the diagnosis of a chronic illness. It's hard when the person that you are spending your life with is no longer the person that you started this journey with. And caregivers have a lot of burden too. Again, finding those resources. Like I know one of the groups I belong to has a special subgroup for caregivers to where they can go and find support. I think communication is going to be really important because a lot of times the person with chronic illness doesn't want to be a burden, doesn't want to be a problem,
Yeah.
doesn't want to feel like they have to be taken care of. And so they'll hide things or keep things to themselves, or they don't want to be too much. And you don't want the person to leave you. I've seen a lot of marriages crumble
Mhm.
because of chronic illness. But so again, and making sure the caregiver has support too. Like, did they have a counselor they're talking to? Did they have their group? Did
Right.
they know? And doing their best to understand what it's like to be in somebody's shoes. Um, I mean, because they're going to see us at our worst, where not everyone is going to do that. So making sure that you're communicating, and not keeping things hidden because you're afraid of what the consequences could be, and bring in a professional if you need to. Couples counseling is a thing for a reason.
Yes, that's definitely true. Yeah, we have a few more questions here and a little bit more time. If you have any other questions, please throw them in the chat. Um, let's see here. So, if working with someone who needs, hmm. Oh, okay, so this person is working with someone who is in the middle of a degenerative disability, they say leading to full blindness. How can you support them getting employment early as they continue to learn more about their identity and their needs?
So this is where you're going to want to bring in vocational rehabilitation. There's a special, like here in Arkansas, it's called Division of Services for the Blind. Um, in Alabama, it was called something different, but there's a special office related to blindness and low vision in every state that handles that exact thing. And the eligibility is you have to have a vision impairment of a certain extent. They know the they know the law. A lot of times they're connected with employers. Um, they're rehabilitation counselors, so they can help navigate a lot of that transition accommodations. And they have the coolest toys. I'll be honest. Like they come and talk to my class. They have some really cool stuff out there. And they can help pay for that. Like Meta has glasses that will read and do visual descriptions for you. You wear them. They can do screen magnifiers, assistive technology. So Division of Services of the Blind or something to that effect is going to be your best resource there.
Yeah. We had a few questions related to um, things that could be considered chronic illness, but that maybe a lot of people aren't familiar with them. We had someone mention menopause. Does this fit under the architecture? What are some other chronic illnesses or chronic pain situations that people kind of oversee, overlook, and don't even think about?
So the definition of disability under the law, which is where what we function in a lot of time, is that it is the presence of a condition that substantially limits one or more major life activity. A major life activity is anything we do on a daily basis, walking, talking, um, tasks of daily living, things like that. So if you have something that's affecting your ability to do a task of daily
Mhm.
living, that's a disability under the law. And sometimes you have to use the term disability, not chronic illness, to get the services that you need. And so helping people understand that even if they don't identify as disabled, because that word has a lot of stigma attached to it and a lot of emotion to it, it's a means to an end to get what you need. So use the term and use the terminology to get the system to work for you instead of against you.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, we might have enough time for a couple more here. I'm going to go with this one about COVID-19. So I think you had mentioned there were oftentimes long-lasting consequences at some point in the presentation. So with COVID-19 pandemic, oh, how can managers deal with these long-lasting consequences? What do you recommend they do, especially, I guess, related to COVID-19?
I think flexibility is really important because what we're seeing with long COVID is it's not the same day to day. Sometimes you may be fine, sometimes you may be really fatigued. We see a lot of people with POTS now coming out of with long COVID. So flexibility is really important. Maybe they work half the time remotely to where like it's a big difference in my productivity sometimes if I'm laying flat versus if I have to sit up. And so having that and post-COVID, no employer can really say that that's not a reasonable accommodation. There was
Mhm.
pre-COVID, there was a lot of like not everyone can telework, not everyone can work remotely. We all did it for 2 years. So, unless you have a very specific job that requires you to be physically present, which there are a few of those, but helping navigate flexibility. Or maybe we look at, for some people, first thing in the morning is really hard. So maybe you work 10 to 6 instead of 8 to
Mm.
5. For others, the later part of the day is harder. So maybe you work 7 to 3. Now, like changing your schedule again and setting your workstation up to be as ergonomic as possible so that you're not using the limited energy that you have to try to get your work done.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, especially with the manager part of the question, anybody can access Jan, right? Yeah. And you had mentioned POTS. Can you describe what that is?
Yeah, so that's postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. So it presents with a lot of dizziness.
Ah,
Tachycardia means your heart rate is fast. Um, and so they're prone to fainting, brain
mm,
fog, all kinds of things like that. So we're seeing that a lot in long COVID patients.
got it.
So I think as a manager too, just setting up your work environment so that it feels like a safe place for someone
Mhm.
to come and disclose. Um, and that one can be a little challenging, but maybe it's in all of your new hire paperwork, you have a section on how to request accommodation so that the person doesn't have to do all of that work. Um, or maybe you have trainings every once in a while about what reasonable accommodations are. So if the manager can really set the tone to create that like safe workplace setting so that somebody feels comfortable disclosing and seeking out accommodations.
All right. Well, we are way over time. We're gonna need to log off here pretty soon because the next sessions are going to begin. Julie, thank you so much for helping us better understand this topic. If there are any questions people have for Julie, kids can always message her. I think you had a slide there with your information. Just so you know, once the conference is over, we're going to upload these videos to the website. So if you are a member, you can always access Julie's presentation, take some notes, access those resources. Thanks, Julie.
Thank you so much.
All right, everyone. If you want to go ahead and hop into your next sessions, please do. Your volunteers should be there. Give them a second to let you into the waiting room and please enjoy the rest of the day. I'm going to stay here for a little bit longer, but thank you all for attending.